Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August 2013 Professor Messer A Plus Study Group. This is a study group we do every month. I was nice to go into the outside world today. I walked out my front door and there was a little bit of fall in the air. So here in our northern hemisphere, it's starting to get a little bit cool. For those of you joining us around the world, welcome. We are following what's going on with you this month. You've sent me a bunch of questions that I'm going to answer. Now, I'm also watching you live. So if you are watching this on a replay, you may want to consider joining us live. You can find out what's going on the Professor Messer calendar at professormesser.com/calendar. And I'm watching the chat room that is on professormesser.com right now. At the bottom of your screen, there is a live A Plus study group chat. And I will see that right there to be able to see everything that's coming through. There's a little bit of a delay, but we can work with that. I've got a lot of questions that have come through this month. There's a lot of things that have been going on. So I think that a good place to start would be to jump right into things and what we've been doing here at Professor Messer. This is our monthly A Plus study group. I'm able to do this because you're able to support me. You watch the videos, which are fantastic. Keep watching those videos. That allows me to keep doing what I'm doing here. A number of you like to take the videos offline. And if you're someone who would like to take them when you're on a plane, when you're in your car with MP3 files, you'd like to be able to have PDF versions of the documents of the slides themselves, you can do that. You can absolutely go to professormesser.com/download-A+, and you can see how to download those videos for a small fee. I've also got obviously all the videos available for you to watch on the Professor Messer website. And we'll talk a little bit later about why it's useful to watch it on the website versus YouTube, but absolutely subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do more than just A plus videos. There's all kinds of technology videos. Sometimes I run across something really interesting and I throw it out there. And if you subscribe, you're able to see that when it comes through. And you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook at professormesser.com/Twitter, professormesser.com/Facebook. So let's also, I want to mention before we get into what we did last month, is if you're watching this live, just under the video is a call-in line. I've already got at least one person who's called in. I know one person was in and then they hung up. Now we have somebody who's back. So I will get to these calls in just a bit. If you wanted to queue up, we're going to try that. We tried it last month. It seemed to work okay. So we'll see if it works as well. Last month, we went over quite a few things. So if you're watching this month or you sent me a question, it may have already been covered last month. Here are a few of the things that we talked about. Boy, I've got quite a zoom on the screen there. We'll have to work with that a little bit. What are the ways that laptop performance can deteriorate? We've got questions that came in. What's the difference between classful subnetting and classless? What are the steps of linking a network from your home? These are some of the things I think that we run into whenever you're trying to figure out how to handle pulling in and looking at some of these things, how to handle connecting from home to business. You know, it's a relatively simple process once you know how it's done, but I think it's the process of trying to figure out how it's done that's really the hardest part, it seems. There, I think I've adjusted the video pretty well there. You guys can see that. What is PCI? We talked about PCI and what it does. What is the minimum number of study hours to take the CompTIA A+ exam? And after getting the A+, what is the next best certification to obtain? I think that's one of the things that that I often see or often get questions about. So we covered that last month. If you go to the A+ videos, you look through the entire index. At the very bottom, I have the replay of all of them. So this is an interesting month for a study group because we are at the very end, the tail end of being able to take the 700 series exams. So I got a lot of questions that came in, and what I did was create a bit of this view so you could see what that looked like. You can see all the questions. This is, you can see this, a tag cloud. I took every question and I just dumped the text in to figure out what's there? What are people asking about? And it was quite an interesting mix, I thought. Of course, a lot of people asking about exam and about test. A lot of people asking about RAID. You have some people talking about memory, networking, operating is a big one. Understanding. I'm with you on that one. We've got confused was a common one that came up. I get such an interesting mix. I get hundreds of questions that come in every month. So it's interesting to see what's going on with that, what you're interested in seeing. So some of these, especially things like RAID, things like networking, we're going to talk about today. There'll be plenty to talk about for what we're doing. Now, if you already have your A plus certification, you can also use these live events to help renew your A plus certification. If your renewal process is one where you are collecting continuing education units, make sure you check the CompTIA website to find out what continuing education units this might apply and how many you would get for those types of things. I think most people are going to be probably taking a higher level certification, but a number of you are collecting those CEs, those continuing education units. So you can always check that on CompTIA. Might as well get something for free just by watching this video. You're not only participating in the live study group, but you can get some credits for that. All right, let's talk about what is new, because it's been about a month since we had our last study group. Let's talk about what's happening on Professor Messer. As you have probably seen, the entire library of 800 series videos is now online. It's available for you to watch. There is also the downloadable version that I mentioned earlier. You can see that. There is also, this is new with the A Plus series, the 800 series of A Plus on the website, is I sent them out and had some people who can type really fast transpose the entire thing. So I have transcripts, I have closed captioning that I have included. I've uploaded my closed captioning to YouTube. So this is not the closed captioning that YouTube automatically does that they say is about 90% accurate. That's probably close to what they're doing. This is 99.9999% accurate. I've tried to read through as much as I can, and I posted those so that you can watch the video on YouTube and you can see the closed captioning at the bottom. I've also got the entire transcript on the same page as the video. So if you just wanted to read it, maybe you can't watch the videos where you are, you can read through the transcript. Now, I realize reading a transcript's not quite the same as reading a book. We don't talk the same way we would write a book, but I think you can get most of it out of that. Take advantage of those things. It's nice to have that on the website, and it's there because a lot of the people who watch the videos aren't necessarily they don't necessarily have English as their first language. So I think it's nice to have that to sync it up. Plus, sometimes I'll say something, you're wondering, what is that word? That's something new. We can read it right there on the screen and be able to see what's going on. If you're looking through the 801 questions, you'll notice, or the 801 videos, you notice I have questions at the bottom of that. There's a very nice set of Q&A that I have. I have this automated program that creates a random set of questions, or randomizes the question, randomizes the answers. So you can take 2 or 3 or 4 questions at the end of your video. I think I've got at least 3 on every video to see how well you understand the topics from that video. They're not meant to be some type of emulation of the exam. They're not meant to represent or mirror the types of questions you will get on the exam. If there is, it's purely coincidental. I didn't set out to do that. They're really to help reinforce the things that you learned in the video. So I've got all of those done for the 801 videos. You will also see those on the 802 videos. I'm working on getting those going as well. So it's good to have those. I like to get that immediate feedback. And some of you have said, I missed the videos or the questions at the end of the video. Okay, well, how about questions right here on the website? Same questions. You can step through it. It grades you at the end. Kind of a nice thing there as well. Another thing I like to do on these study groups is I like to get your feedback. I like you to participate on these study groups. And so I have questions for you. And the question that I have for you here today is, how long have you been studying for your A+ certification? This is all done online. If you have a mobile device, you can go out to vot.rs and it'll ask you for a number and you type in 975187. Or you can, if you have a QR code reader on your device, you can grab that QR code. It should take you right to the page. You'll be able to see that. And I will be able to track what you're seeing with that. Let me hide the results. For instance, if I look on my screen, here's what I see on my side. How long have you been studying for your A+ certification? I'll pop up that QR code so you can see it again. So we're going to have some other questions throughout the study group. No cheating when we get to those questions. Do not answer the question in the chat room. I'm watching you. Don't do that. But I will absolutely go through and be able to track what you are doing here. We'll be able to see it as you have these responses come through. One of the things about this study group that we do is the interactive piece of it. So as we go through and start going through questions, I get your feedback on what you think. And that's why I have the phone number that we'll be able to go to and take some calls once we get through a couple of the questions here. I'll let you know when we're about ready to go to the phone calls, and I get this immediate feedback from you. What we generally see on this particular question are people that are just getting started with their A plus certification, and it kind of has that first three groupings here, which is less than a month. I realize it's very small on your screen. Less than a month, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12, and more than a year. I think for my A plus, I'd probably started and then stopped somewhere in there. When I finally got ready to take it, it was about 1 to 3 months that it took me to finally get into it and finish it up. But I had already had 15 years of experience in the industry, and I still had to study a month and a half through all of the different topics. It's remarkable how broad the A plus exam really is. People who have never taken it before think, oh, it's an easy exam. Why even study? Just walk in and take the exam. They have no idea the scope of all of those topics that you could get into. And it is true. It's very broad. Some people will just say, let me put this down. I need to come back to this when my life allows me to really focus on it. So it's good to see you more than a year people out there. This is one of the things about the study group I like, is we have a good mix of people everywhere. And as we go through the study group today, I'll be asking you other questions. So have your mobile device handy, be able to pop open a new window. We will be going back to this interactive Q&A, this interactive polling that we have on mentimeter.com. It's a nice capability. I like using that. Let's go to the questions that you asked about this month. And as I'm looking through the chat room, you folks are looking at doing this A plus exam, and there were a lot of questions about the 700 series exam, the 800 series exam, and this is probably the most important thing this month, or at least from a news perspective, is the 700 series exam is going away. It is finally being retired. This is something that was announced about a year ago. We have had a year to finally take the 700 series exam. Now, unfortunately, there are going to be a number of people on August 31st that suddenly realize, wow, the test is going away, but I took my 701. I haven't had a chance to take my 702. Now what happens? Well, now you start over. Once the exam is retired, you have to start over. You have to take both the 701 and 702 to be able to be certified. You can't take the 701 and then take one of the 800 series. It doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, I'm getting a lot of emails and messages coming in of people who haven't quite gotten to take that second exam yet. And they're worried now that they won't have enough time. And I'm worried for them as well. Now, you can, of course, take the 800 series exams right now. The 800 series exam has been out for 6 to 9 months now. I'm trying to think back. It's been almost a year. It's been quite a while that the 800 series has been available. So you can always do the 800 series. And quite honestly, there's about 85% of the content from the 700 series is still in the 800 series. The technology didn't dramatically change in the last 3 years. There are some changes that are significant, though. And if you want to go out to professormesser.com/FAQ for frequently asked questions, I do explain to you the differences between the 700 series and the 800 series. Now, keep in mind, you only have a couple of weeks, not even. It's the 17th of August. The last time you would be able to take this exam is the 31st. It's a couple of weeks and you're done. That's it. You will never be able to take the 700 series exam again. So think about it as you're going through this, about what path you want to take. You may not want to make that investment in taking a 700 series when you feel like you're not going to pass it. You maybe invest that money in taking the 800 series. I hate to see, Bernard says in chat room, that's why the pressure is on. It makes me so uncomfortable when people are in those positions. So I just try to tell, if you are gonna take the 700 series, you have to take it. Take some time off, lock yourself in a room, study really hard to do all of the things we talk about in these study groups, all of the study tips that people are telling you. Get as many books and as many resources as you can so that you'll be able to take that exam and do well. If you do plan on taking the 800 series, it's a little bit different. The format has changed. So if you're somebody who's very accustomed to the 700 series and you're going to the 800 series, it's really a completely different exam in the way that it's laid out, the format of the exam. On the 700 series, there was the essentials exam and the practical application. And there's a good bit of overlap between the two. You learned about Windows in the 701, and then you worked on in troubleshooting Windows in the 702. Well, it doesn't work like that any longer. As you can see, you've got on the 801, hardware networking, laptops, printers, operational procedures. Notice operating systems are only listed on the 802. Networking is on the 801, security is on the 802. You don't really mix and match. The only time you ever see anything that is an overlap is down here in troubleshooting, because that will go back and you'll need to know things about troubleshooting printers. You'll need to know things about troubleshooting operating systems, about troubleshooting hardware. Those are things that are pretty important for the A+ exams. It's really one of the few places where you will absolutely see those coming through. Okay, that brings us up to date with all the news that is going on this month and the impending retirement of the 700 series. So now let's talk about things we need to know for that 700 series and things we can also need to know for the 800 series. I have a question for you. Do not answer this in the chat room and get your QR code readers handy. The question is, which of these RAID types create an exact duplicate of information across drives? There is a RAID type, and I will bring up the list of those in a moment, but it's RAID 1, RAID 0, RAID 5, RAID 6. Which one of those create an exact duplicate of information across the drives? You can go to vot.rs and use 735330, or get your QR code reader and snapshot that. And I'm going to bring up, or at least view on my screen, all the answers that are coming through so you can see what's going on there. If you go to vot.rs, 735330. And I asked this because, as you saw in that cloud of all of those words that I brought up earlier, RAID is one of those that was a little bit bigger than others. I get a lot of RAID questions every month, and I obviously can't cover it every single month in my study group, but it is something that is useful to know. And RAID is one of those things that we don't really run into on our home computer. We don't really run into it on our laptop. Although I did have a laptop that had 2 drives in it and you could RAID those drives together. You just don't see a lot of that, though. It's very unique to see at home. So a lot of people will see this for the first time, and it's such an unusual thing to think about. RAID, I don't know what that is. It's a completely new concept. So it's not unusual, I think, that I get a lot of questions about RAID. But in the enterprise, in a small business, a medium-sized business, in any business where data is important, you can almost guarantee that there's going to be some type of RAID array in place. Incredibly useful. And if you are talking about arrays across any enterprise, all of their data is in a RAID array. If you're on the Professor Messer website right now, there's RAID array right there in my office, in this studio right now. I don't even think you can see it, but behind the scenes, behind this desk, is a RAID array. In fact, I need to upgrade my RAID array to make it even bigger. There's never enough hard drive space. It's a universal truth, indeed. So that's one of the things I run into, is just trying to get that in a place where I can do something with it. We got about 50 responses for this RAID. Let's see what people said on here. The responses are, looks like 41 of you said RAID 1, 4 of you said RAID 0, 5 of you said RAID 7, and 1 of you said RAID 6. There's RAID 6. RAID 6 is something you don't even see on the A+ exam. Indeed, they don't ask about RAID 6 in the A+ exam requirements. RAID 6 is RAID 5 with another set of parity. There's 2 parity that are being written in RAID 6. And that's, if you recall, with RAID 5, you could lose a drive and still be running. With RAID 6, you can lose 2 drives and still be running. You won't be asked for that on the A+ exam, but I thought it was interesting to add that little tidbit in there. Now, the reason I talked about this, before I get to the question in the chat room, Benny asks, will we have some type of RAID in SSD? Well, SSD is just another drive, just like any other drive is. It absolutely can do RAID with SSD drives. Obviously, you don't have to worry too much about that if you're worried about performance, because SSDs are so fast. You're not really doing RAID 0 to improve performance. You're usually putting them in some type of redundant configuration. Although still, RAID 0, if you were trying to really, maybe an experimental configuration where you really wanted to soup up RAID, there's a great video that on YouTube I saw when SSDs were just becoming popular, where they put, I don't know what it was, 16 or 32 drives. It was some enormous number of drives together and booted a Windows system, and instantly, that's when you first get that remarkable, wow, SSDs are amazing. It's incredible. The question that came in that caused me to write that was that from AH said, this concept of RAID is confusing. RAID is hardware. No, RAID is software. No, it's both. What is it? Where's it sitting? Are they an array of independent disks? It sounds like they're still dependent on each other. It's one of those things that we get so used to saying it over and over in our industry, we forget that the word itself, the name that we're using for this abbreviation, is a little bit confusing. So let's walk through what this really is. This RAID configuration. RAID does stand for redundant today. RAID does stand for redundant array of independent disks. Now, we call them independent disks because they're just not one big drive. They are separate, and that's why they're independent. They're separate physical drives themselves. Now, one of the things that I often see is you see it often written as a redundant array of inexpensive disks. That's because that's what we used to call it. We used to call it a redundant array of inexpensive disks. And that's because you used to have these enormous mainframe, what we call DASD drives. I don't know if you recall, it's those direct access storage devices is what we called them. That's what we called hard drives back in the mainframe days, because we were so used to tape. We didn't have hard drives. We had tape, or we had punch cards. You couldn't just randomly access or direct access data. You had to spin through the entire tape to get to the data you wanted, and it could take minutes to spin through that tape. You've probably seen the mainframe tapes, and they're spinning up on the device. You had to spin through the entire tape to get to the tiny little bit of data that you wanted. Then we got these hard drives. You could directly access your data. Direct access storage device. That's fantastic. And they were enormously expensive. And for 5 megabytes, it was this enormous disk pack that went in. It's this huge monster thing. And when we came out with this idea of doing redundant arrays, we said these were inexpensive disks. And that's relative to mainframes. Of course, they were inexpensive. But of course, as times changed, these of course they were inexpensive disks. That's all that anybody used. We weren't using these big mainframe drives any longer. Even mainframes today are using RAID arrays with these types of 10,000 RPM 3.5 inch drives or 5.25 inch drives in them. So that's why you'll see differences. That's where the independent comes from, is because they're just individual. We could almost let's call it something else. It's called a redundant array of individual disks. Now we're going to change it again, but you can think of it that way when you're working with it. There are a lot of different RAID levels. Now, RAID does not automatically mean things are redundant. For instance, RAID 0 is what we call striping. RAID 0 writes a little bit of data to one disk and a little bit of data to another disk. It's not a duplicate. So when we talk about RAID 0, there's no redundancy built into that. The answer to the question I asked earlier, where we are writing a duplicate of data from one disk to the other, was RAID 1. So all you folks who said, well, was it RAID 1? 49 of you said, yeah, that's RAID 1. That's exactly the right one. You're correct. It is not RAID 0. It's not actually RAID 5 either. I guess sort of, if you wanted to kind of do it in this meta type view of the world, that's really where we started to see RAID 5, because with RAID 5, we wrote a little bit of data to every disk, and on another disk, we wrote some parity data. So we really didn't duplicate anything with RAID 5. So I can't give you even partial credit for that one. The correct answer in this case was RAID 1. Now, the CompTIA A+ exam for the 800 series wants you to know another one. So up to this point, for the 700 series, you needed to know 0, 1, and 5. And for the 800 series, you have to know RAID 10, or RAID 1 plus 0, which is a striping of mirrored drives. As I mentioned, striping doesn't provide redundancy, but what if you duplicated every drive in the stripe? Striped of mirrored drives. That's one of those things that becomes very useful when you really want to improve performance across those stripings. And so in the chat room, Aaron asked the obvious question, why would you even use RAID 0 if you're losing data? Well, sometimes maybe the drive itself and the data you're putting on the drive isn't the most important thing. Maybe it's temporary files that you're using. Maybe you do an amazing CAD/CAM configuration. Maybe you're doing a lot of video editing. You're writing a lot of temporary files. And maybe you just want a big area set aside that is writing those files. And if you could write just a little bit to every disk, it improves the write and the read performance. So it's really just a performance kick that you're getting from RAID 0. Has nothing to do with redundancy. That's why you would want to be able to take advantage of RAID 0. If you are, and I would think most places are this way, if you're extremely protective of your data, that data is very important to you, and quite honestly, with every organization, the data really is the most important thing that you have, absolutely use a RAID type that is going to provide you with redundancy. Use RAID 1, use RAID 5, use RAID 6, use RAID 10, use a different kind of RAID configuration. Now, the question also that we saw earlier was the question about hardware RAID and software RAID. So let's break this down just a bit. Now, if you put in a bunch of drives in your computer and you turned it on and you started Windows and you went to Disk Manager inside of Windows, it would show a lot of independent disks that were inside of that. I've got a picture of this that we're going to see. Windows sees these individual drives, and you would tell Windows or Linux or Mac OS X, the operating system, all of these operating systems know how to build RAID arrays these days. You tell Windows, grab these 4 drives that I stuck into this machine and make them a RAID 5, please. Windows says, sure, I'll scrunch those together. And Windows is going to be responsible for calculating the parity. Windows is going to be responsible for writing the data to the proper drives. And what Windows will do is say, I have a RAID array for you. It's drive G. All you see is drive G. You see this one big drive G. You no longer see those 4 drives that were plugged into the operating system. This is useful in that you don't need anything special. You don't need special hardware. You don't need anything special inside of your computer. All you need is a way to plug in 4 drives. And as long as you have 4 interfaces or a separate adapter card you're plugging into your computer and you're putting all 4 drives on it, and you have an operating system, you've got RAID. You're done. Now, one of the disadvantages, obviously, is that there's a performance issue associated with this. Anytime you're doing any type of calculation in software, you'll probably hear this term across the industry. If you're doing it in software, it generally is slower. If you're doing it in hardware, then you've got dedicated processors, you've got dedicated memory. It's a purpose-built piece of hardware that can do things faster. That's the reason we might choose to put a hardware-based RAID array. We would grab an adapter card like the one that's here. We would grab it and put it into our computer, and we plug our drives into that adapter card. We don't plug them into the normal motherboard interface that we have. We plug them into this card. In fact, you can almost see the 4 SATA interfaces on the outside of this card on the far right side. This is right over here. This controller now is in charge of the disks. And when you start your computer, you will get an option in the BIOS to set up your RAID. And when the operating system finally starts, the operating system just sees the one drive. It doesn't see 4 drives anymore. You've completely separated the RAID from the operating system. The operating system just talks directly to that controller. The controller figures out the whole RAID piece. Makes it go faster. Makes it really go faster. Here's what the software RAID might look like. I realize this is pretty small on your screen. Let's see if I can zoom up on this a little bit. Oh, I can. So in your computer management, in your disk management that you would have on your computer, here's a very good example of someone who's building out a RAID volume. So there's 4 disks on here, disk 1, disk 2, disk 3, and disk 4. And you can see the drives are unallocated. And in Windows, you would say, I'd like to create a new RAID 5 volume. And it lists out the disks, and you simply add them off to the right side, and you've created a new disk volume. Very, very easy to get that running that way. On a hardware RAID, if you started up your computer, this is something you might see. Now, every RAID controller has a different hardware configuration. This one happens to be for an Intel Matrix Storage Manager. But you can see it's a similar type thing that we saw in Windows. You're selecting which drives, you're building out a RAID array. This happens to be a RAID 0 array, a stripe. And here's the size of it. It's using, sorry for my squeak there, it's using 149 gig. It's using these 2 disks, these 2 75 gig drives to create that. That's one of those nice parts about doing it in hardware. Now we start up our operating system. The operating system sees this one stripe drive. It doesn't see these individual physical disks any longer. And we get the performance increase that we have available to that. Now, along those same lines, question came in from MJ that said, well, if I have a RAID array then that's failing, how do I even know that it's failing, and how would I fix it? How do you even go through that process? Well, this is one of the things that you'll run into, is that you will, ideally in the RAID software, there will be a method to notify you. This is pretty important on any enterprise, small, medium, or large, that you get notifications when something's going wrong. In my network attached storage that I have in my studio, it will send me an email if something's going wrong, because it's behind my desk. I may even forget it's there. It's running as RAID 5, so if I lose a drive, it continues to run. I was working early on in my career with a power company that had a RAID array in Novell NetWare. So this, you can see I'm going way back in my head. But the reason this particular story stuck with me is that we were walking in to do an upgrade to the operating system. It was late at night. Nobody was around. We go in and look at the machine. We pull the cover off, and we notice there's a red light on. There's two discs inside of it. There's a red light on one of them. That disc was now bad. The RAID array was broken. They were running RAID 1. They were running this as a mirror. And we looked at the drive. Okay, that drive is broken. It's obvious which one needs to come out. You would need to access the documentation for your RAID array. Some RAID arrays allow you a hot pluggable where you, while the system is running, you can unplug the bad drive and plug in the new one. Not all of them do that. Some of them require you power down, replace the drive, and power it back on. Make sure you check that. But we said, well, their drive failed. Nobody was monitoring it. And we looked back in the logs. It had failed 6 months ago. They were running on their RAID configuration for 6 months. And that if they had lost the other drive, obviously any time in that 6-month period, they would have lost all of the data on that machine had they not had a backup. That is a very good example of why you have to keep monitoring those RAID arrays and get them going. So if you go to your machine, you get the notification, and what you'll see is it will tell you if the drive array has failed, and it might even tell you exactly which disk has failed in that RAID array. Every RAID configuration does things a little bit differently. So make sure you check yours and see how it's configuring there as well. So that's RAID. So I thought that was a nice overview, especially for your 700 folks, that your 700 series exam takers that have the next 2 weeks. You may be asked about RAID. It's absolutely in the exam objectives. All right, I have another question for you. This one, make sure you get your QR codes reader. Don't answer the question in the chat room. The question I have for you is, which of these technologies will protect your data? You go to vot.rs and go to 182629. When you get there, you'll see I have 4 options for you. Which one of these technologies will protect your data? It is SSID broadcast suppression, MAC filtering, WPA, and port forwarding. One of those will actually protect data. The other 3 will not protect data, at least not in the protection of data and keep that data private. So go to vot.rs, go to 182629 to be able to answer that question. And this is also an important topic, not only for the 700 series, but the 800. Notice I'm blending these together in this study group today. You will be asked about things like wireless technologies, and these specifically are speaking to wireless technologies. Obviously, if the data is going through the air, anybody can grab it out of the air. It's like anybody can tune in their radio to that frequency. The real key is being able to watch what's going on and be able to allow or disallow or configure or not configure the data protection in the way that makes sense for you. So I'm going to pop over. If everybody got your QR code there, here we go. Which of these technologies will protect your data? We can see, you need the QR code. I'll pop that QR code up there just a moment so you can see it. The technologies that will protect your data, the SSID broadcast suppression, the MAC filtering, the WPA, the port forwarding. When you start configuring, there's a little bit of this in the 700 series exam. You have to know these technologies. On the 800 series exam, you not only have to know the technologies, there's a whole section on configuring a SOHO router, a small office home office router. And that includes wireless technologies inside of that. So it's one of those things that's very, very useful to be able to do that. That's one of those. So we got about 51 responses. Let's see what people say. We've got 3 people that said SSID broadcast suppression, of course, is what you would protect data with. MAC filtering, 10, it's filtering, it's protection, right? Port forwarding, we had 2 people, but 39 of you got the right answer, which is WPA. Really didn't fool anybody with that one. Now, it's interesting. I see that 12 people, MAC filtering. That's the one that people said, well, it's filtering. That's protection. You're filtering out some MAC addresses. Some people can connect. If you're not on the list, you can't connect. That makes perfect sense. So the question that came in was, well, that's not a security measure? I thought that was a security measure. Doesn't MAC filtering filter things? Wouldn't that make sense? Let's talk about MAC filtering, because this comes up a lot. And if you go to a coffee shop, if you go to an industry event, if you anywhere there's open Wi-Fi, anybody can listen in to see what you're doing. Now, with With MAC layer filtering, with media access control layer filtering, we're really filtering out the hardware address of a machine. Every wireless device has its very specific and unique, ideally unique MAC address. That MAC address is one that identifies that physical device. It's how the access point sends data to you. It's how you send data to the access point at the most fundamental level. And the way that we do with MAC filtering is we go into the wireless access point or the wireless router, and we put in the MAC address of everybody who should be able to talk to this device. I'm going to put in this MAC address, this MAC address, and this MAC address. Nobody else can talk to this access point. I'm going to filter out everyone else. What? That sounds pretty secure to me. If I can just say these 5 stations are the only ones that can talk to an access point, that's perfect. My neighbors, people in the building, nobody else can connect to that access point. That's fantastic. That's exactly what I want. Except there's always a but, isn't there? But MAC addresses, unfortunately, are just too easy to spoof. It's built into your operating system in the driver of the car in most cases, the ability to customize what you would like the MAC address to be. It's very easy to do this when you're building out a virtual machine and being able to do that. And that's, as somebody mentioned in the chat room, this is what we call security through obscurity. Just because you're hiding that you're there doesn't actually mean you're not really there. All I would have to do to be able to take advantage of this is go into the driver, go into the system that has this. Here we go, right here. This is me building out a virtual machine, and see that here is a virtual network configuration. I'm going to enable spoofing of the MAC address. I'm just going to put in whatever MAC address I want, and I'm going to have it match somebody who was here earlier, because you can't encrypt the MAC addresses. Those go through the air in the clear, and it makes it easy. Now it's perfect. I can now get on the network, and I'm right through your system. Also, even though I'm spoofing the MAC address, even though I'm not in your network, I can still tune into the signal and listen in. If you're not encrypting with WPA, I can still see the data in the clear. I may not be able to join the network, but I can hear everything. So that's just a couple of examples of being able to do that, how you would work with those pieces of it. So a question, do I have a recommendation for a self-study book or for labs that I might be able to work with? And I absolutely do. You probably have seen on your study group live screen there that there is a link for the integrated learning Freestyle that is available from GTS Learning. This Freestyle is one where they have labs available. So already I've shown you setting things up on a Windows device. You saw those disks and you were creating RAID arrays. Well, to be able to do that with RAID 5, you need a Windows Server configuration. Can't do that in Windows Home Edition. You can't do it in Professional. You may be able to do it in Ultimate. So if you had an Ultimate version, or if you had a server version, you'd be able to load up and have different options for RAID. What if you didn't have those operating systems? You're still asked about them on the exam, but you don't have those available in your office, in your lab. They're not something that's available to you. Well, GTS Learning has put together for us live labs with labs that you can step by step through the entire configuration to see everything that's there. It's remarkable what you're able to see, in fact, with the live labs. I think that the nice part about it is that it's this virtual system that's out in the cloud somewhere. I don't have to worry about having a lot of equipment here in my office, in my studio. And one of the nice things about it is I can make any change I want. I can modify the boot sectors. I can modify the Windows configuration. I can overwrite things. And if I mess it up, I simply click a button and the whole thing restarts fresh again. I did nothing to my own machine, and I've broken my own machine a lot of times. Pretty darn useful to have that. There is this link, professormesser.com/freestyle labs, that also gives us a special price for study groups. I work with GTS Learning for quite some time, and you can go out there and see they're $99. I put a link there, and you can try them for free. I think they give you an hour of time that you could sit there and run through them. So you don't have to make that investment initially. If we were to look at this, I've got the live labs up on my screen. I'm going to just launch the GTS Learning piece so this comes up. And you can kind of see, save that resolution. That looks like a good one. There is a whole list of courses that you can go through And here they are, introducing Windows 7, system administration, disk management. We were just talking about that. So I'm going to drill down into disk management. The lab is set up with a domain controller, Windows 7 workstation, a Windows XP workstation. Here are the devices on this side. You can see them on the list, and I can power on each device. And I know it's hard to see on your screen, but as I power these on, a little orange light turns on next to it. So I can see that which ones are booting up, which ones are ready to go. All of my labs that are here in the exercises, I can now read through. While it's booting up, I can go through the list of things that I need to do. And all of the labs take me step by step. Step 1, power on and connect to this device. Click Start, right-click Computer, select Manage. The computer management snap-in is displayed, and on and on. Makes it so easy to understand what to do next. I can go through this entire list, and they even have screenshots here so I can follow along and be able to work with those. All of these, in fact, there's one that's running right here. It turned green. So I'm just going to click on the one that turned green, and here I am. It's my Windows device. So now I can follow the actual steps that it told me to follow. It said, go to my programs, go to my maintenance, go to the other control panel, go to the administration, go do all the things that it told me to do. I can go in here and change anything I'd like. Let's go to the network and sharing center. I can modify which network I'm on. I can look at my IP addressing. I can modify the commands for the disk management that it's set up for us. I can do whatever I'd like. Look how easy that is. It's just in a browser. I didn't have to load any extra software. I didn't have to do anything special. I'm actually using this one in HTML5. I think maybe running this one in a Java. As I know, I'm running in HTML5 right now, but there's a Java version as well if you're running a browser that's not HTML5. So I really didn't have to load any software, especially if you're really concerned about having Java run in a browser. Probably a good concern. Run it as HTML5. This is great. There's my domain controller. Start that up, completely separate 2008 R2 device. Nice setup. And I think the price for $99, that would save you just the installation of one piece of operating system that you'd have to buy and install into your system. Make sure if you'd like to see more about that, it's professormesser.com/freestyle labs. I've worked with the folks at GTS Learning for years. They are great people. They've got great products, and try it for free. You might see some of those things. You might like what they have. I have another question for you. Then we're going to go to some phone calls. The question for you is about IP addresses. So don't answer this in the chat room, but the question is, which of these protocols can convert a name to an IP address? And I have a set of protocols that I've set aside just for you to be able to see. So make sure you go out to the vot.rs. You can choose some of the options that I have available for you there. And the options that you will see once you go to 649766 is the option DHCP, ICMP, DNS, OSPF, and TCP. I put a few options in there for you on that one. So a couple of things available for you to look at with that particular version. It is vot.rs 649766. And this was a question that was created, which protocols can convert this name to IP addresses, because there were some networking questions. And obviously on the 700 and 800 series exam, you're going to need to know about networking, and specifically the raw pieces that are required to get your computer running from the very beginning. If you had to configure the network settings on your computer, what would you have to put in to be able to surf the internet? Now, those are important things to know, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot problems on the network. So the question here obviously lends itself towards that. Which of these protocols can convert a name to an IP address? And we have DHCP, ICMP, DNS, OSPF, and TCP. We've got 33 people that have responded. So I'm going to bring up the answers. It looks like I didn't fool very many people with that one. 38 of you so far said, oh, it's DNS. That one we got. It's DNS. Now, the reason I bring that question up for the DNS piece of it is, could you recap IP addresses, default gateways, and DNS and what they do and how they interoperate between all of the things that we're working with? And if you look at configuring a machine to talk on the internet, you need three things. If you just need to talk locally, you really only need two things. Maybe three if you're in a larger environment, but you need an IP address. Every device needs a unique IP address, and those are paired with a subnet mask that defines what subnet this particular machine belongs to. So it will know when it needs to talk out to a router and the rest of the internet, and then you also need a default gateway in this mix so that when it does need to talk to the internet, you can communicate outside of your subnet. So if you need just to talk on this subnet, you need an IP address and subnet mask. If you need to talk outside of this subnet, you need a default gateway. And then if you need to be able to convert a name like google.com to an IP address so that you can communicate to that, you would need a DNS server as well. Well, before we get into the A+, what I call the questions, this might be a good time to take a quick break on my screen, flip over to see a few things. We do have a phone line at the bottom. I'm going to step through a couple of questions that you asked about the A+ exam, but feel free to call in when we're done going through those. I'll take calls if we have anybody who'd like to call directly to ask a question that I haven't covered so far today. So one of the questions that came in about the exam, this one came up, I saw it on a couple of mailing lists. This came up as a direct question from me. Why is Mac OS and Linux not covered in the A+ exams? Because they're obviously popular. They've got a good chunk of the market. Everything that you're doing on the Professor Messer website right now, you're doing in Linux. So why aren't those covered? Well, of course, that probably is really all about time. It's about time and it's about popularity. If you go back to not the 700 series, but before that, the 600 series, you had to know the basics of Mac OS, the desktop on Mac OS, and the desktop on Linux. Not the text side of Linux, but really the graphical view of Linux. And you may find that if you take some outdated test questions on the internet, you may find questions about Mac OS and questions about Linux. You're wondering, where did that come from? It came from 5-6 years ago is where that came from. They don't ask that in the 700 series. They don't ask it on the 800 series. It's really just about how much time. And most of the install base in environments today that your end users are using in these enterprises is Windows. There's just a numbers game at this point. If it was Mac OS, we'd be learning about Mac OS. If it was Linux, we'd be learning about Linux. There's just not enough time to be able to know everything about those and put those into an exam. We're already having to learn Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, and many different editions of those different versions. So that's pretty important to be able to know what's on the exam. And that's one of the questions I get all the time is what is on the exam? What should I know about this topic to be able to pass my A+ exam? So if you haven't already, make sure you go out to the CompTIA website and download the objectives. They're out there. They will tell you everything that's on the exam. They will tell you exactly how much of these topics are on the exam. This is a fantastic resource. And it's unfortunate when people will send me an email or they'll talk to me in the chat room and say, I didn't pass my exam. They asked me this question and I didn't even know they'd be asking that topic. And my next question to them is, well, did you download the objectives? No, I didn't download those objectives. Didn't think that was important. But of course, they tell you exactly the topics. I use them as a checklist. I download them and I check off, do I know that topic? Do I know that topic? Do I know that topic? If you're trying to pass your 700 series exam before the end of the month, download the objectives. Use them as a checklist. If you take a test online or you grab a book and you take a test, maybe go to Freestyle and you take their sample test and you're going through their test and you miss a topic, make a note of what the topic is, go back to the objectives where they list out that particular topic and find out what you need to know about it. I think that's one of the things that are incredibly useful when you're trying to figure out on an exam you've never taken before, what is going to be asked of me? What is going to come through this list of things? What am I going to need to know to pass this? They'll tell you exactly what you need to know. So make sure you grab those. Incredibly important to be able to do that. Along those same lines, Mark asked, what sockets do I need to know? You know, that's one that in the 700 series, I will say that the exam objectives did not do a very good job for you in the 700 series exam because they didn't list out specific sockets. And people, when they start memorizing things, get really wrapped up in the whole sockets thing. What do I need to know? Tell me exactly what I need to know for those pieces. Now, fortunately, in the 800 series exam, they do give you an exact list of those sockets. If I flip over, you'll be able to see this is the exam objectives. And you can see that I need to differentiate among various CPU types and features. I just searched for CPU and found it. And in the 800 series, they break down exactly which socket types you need to know. Here's the Intel socket types. Here is the AMD socket types. There you go. Need to know? They're exactly there. Now, if you grab an 800 series book, a 700 series book, and you see all of the different options available on that, one of the things you'll notice is that these books will put every socket known to man in the book. I don't know why they do this. They list out 100 sockets. They go, okay, that's what you need to know. If you're at that point where you're just trying to memorize the exam, you're trying to get through the 700 series, don't even worry about it. Go worry about memorizing other things if that's your biggest concern. If you're so freaked out, you might get a question. This socket was one question in section 1. Let's go all the way back to the top of this. So section 1, admittedly, is a big chunk of your exam. It's 40% of the exam that you will take is PC hardware. But PC hardware includes configuring BIOS settings, differentiating between motherboard components, all those settings, comparing and contrasting RAM types and features, expansion card installation and configuration, storage device installation and configuration. Boy, it's a big one. Scroll. Differentiating among various CPU types, of which socket types is only one of the topics that's mentioned inside of that. You also have characteristics and cooling as well. Section 1.7, compare and contrast connection interfaces, explain their purpose, install an appropriate power supply based on a given scenario, evaluate components for a custom configuration, display devices, connector types, we're going, peripheral devices. Okay, that's section 1. Now the 700 series is very similar in the amount of information that they're going to be asking you. That's the 800 series. That's a lot of information to be 40%. You might not get a question on sockets. You might not get any. You may have spent hours memorizing sockets and you don't get any questions about it. So don't kill yourself over it. Memorize some that are very popular, kind of get it in your mind, the different socket types and what they are, so you can make an educated guess if you don't know for sure. But don't kill yourself over it. You only have a little bit of time for those 700 series and kind of on the 800 series. I know it's kind of backwards for me to tell you, don't study something. Now, if you have time and you can study them, absolutely study them. But if you're running out of time, you need to figure out what you should put to the side. I think that's a pretty good one to put to the side. I think it's one of the things you run into. Okay. This is pretty important for getting ready for the A+ exam. And one of the things I like to do when I'm getting ready for the A+ is I like to look at the objectives. I like to get a good book. Maybe you'd like to watch my videos. Maybe also get a good Q&A on the Freestyle that I mentioned earlier from GTS Learning. They have a couple of really good Q&A sample exams. You can go through some sample exams there. There's a number of books. I like the Exam Cram Practice Questions book, which has a lot of good questions in it. Get as many resources as you can and use that checklist, and you'll do fine for getting through the A+ exam. Okay, we're going to see if we can take a phone call. We have somebody that's here. I'm going to try to pick up this line and see if this technology will work for us. That's the real question, isn't it? What's your name and what's your question? See if they're there. I can hear a hissing noise as if the 812 area code was trying to speak to me. And there's no noise. They walk away. Are they listening to the stream? They tried to call me. We'll come back to you. I'll put you back on hold. Just in case you had walked away, if you're listening to the stream, then you're probably in a case where you're 30 seconds behind me. So that would be one of those things. Feel free to call in. You've got the call-in number there, 347-989-8745. I know one of you mentioned earlier in the chat that it'd be nice to have a toll-free number. I agree. Toll-free numbers are not inexpensive. There's a cost I would pay per minute to have you there, but I'm thinking of trying it just to have it there. One thing you can do is I'm using Blog Talk Radio to do this. And if you have a Blog Talk Radio account, and you can make one for free, you can go to Blog Talk Radio /Professor Messer, and you can connect via Skype for free. So there is a free way to do this. Should have probably mentioned that earlier earlier in there. If you go to Blog Talk Radio, you make an account for the next one. Go to blogtalkradio.com/Professor Messer. There's a Skype button on the screen. You can just punch that Skype button and it will connect you to me via Skype. That way, that one's a free one. We do have somebody that came through from a very mysterious telephone number. This may be a good one to try. Let's pick up the phone. And what's your name and what's your question?
Hi, this is Mr. Graham. It's actually a favor request that I have of you. I'd appreciate it if you'd go more into performance-based questions on your reviews and things, because most of the practice material that we have are just multiple choice, and if we're going to have to answer these new performance-based questions, it would be great to have some in your package.
And I'm finding it really hard to find resources for performance-based questions out on the internet. Are you finding the same thing?
Yes, I am. The only time I've seen one is the one that the tape was done for YouTube for, for Pearson. Thanks for the favor request that I have. I'd appreciate it if you go more into performance-based questions on your reviews and things.
I think it's a good question. And one of the things that I have found the same thing, is that there's very few performance-based question options out there. I think there is a great video on YouTube, and this is probably the one you're mentioning, although there's a couple of versions. So I want to be sure to mention this one on YouTube. If I flip over to my YouTube screen to allow you to see this, there's too many buttons on here. So here's my YouTube screen I've got up, and it's the CompTIA exams. What I searched for in YouTube was candidate experience. First, I had to remember how to spell candidate, and then I had to type in candidate experience. And that brought up on my list, third down, was CompTIA exams, the candidate experience. What thing you should be looking for here is this one is 15 minutes long. 15 minutes and 44 seconds. Have you had a chance to see this one?
I just pulled it up.
Okay. There's one that's 3 minutes long, and it's very short. It practically has nothing in it. This one goes through the entire candidate process of going through and understanding when you sit down, what are you going to see? When you go through multiple choice questions, what are you going to see? Let me scroll up on this. Maybe I can move forward on this. I got a lot of bandwidth that's being used right now. So here's the types of things that you'll see on this exam. And if you fast forward in, let's see how far in. There's the multiple choice questions. And if you keep going into this here's some right here. So you're getting into some of these 7 minutes in. There's a fill in the blank. Here's a simulation. Here is after the simulation. That's the one we usually, I think, most think about with that. After the simulation, here's one that is a connect the correct device to the correct name. Here's one where you have to configure a network configuration based on a picture. So it does give you a number of options there. And admittedly, I have nothing on my website from a performance-based. I think we're just now trying to figure out what the performance-based are going to look like. But I think what I should do, and I have in some notes that I've made, these would make some good performance-based questions, a fill in the blank, and that piece. So hopefully this particular one will be something that's useful, that you'll be able to use. And I think it's that type of data, or at least the video of this, that gave me some very good ideas of what to do. So hopefully this can help you too. Does that help answer the question?
I appreciate it. That's very helpful, because it just seems that all the practice exams that are out there now currently are ones that they're all multiple choice. They don't have any performance-based questions on them. And since CompTIA is making a big deal out of it, it's kind of important to get ready for them that way.
It is. And keep in mind that the performance-based questions, you might get 3 of them, you might get 5. Somebody, I think, told me he got 8 performance-based questions on his. Maybe it was that many. Maybe it seemed like a lot. Maybe it was 6 or 7. The rest of the test is still going to be multiple choice. So you're not going to have the whole test as performance-based questions, but you'll get a few. And unfortunately, online, you're never quite certain if the data that you're getting online, the sample tests you get online, are really that great. So you do kind of have to be careful about what you're getting there. But do you have another question?
No, you've been very helpful. I appreciate it. I look forward to going through your future live events.
Appreciate your calling. Thanks for that piece. It's always nice to
Thank you.
get some phone calls coming in. Good studies. The nice part about having that up and the performance-based views of this, you can see there's so many different kinds of questions that you might get. You never know exactly what they might be throwing up at you and hoping that you're going to be able to answer. And I have made some notes myself that I think here's some things that people might be able to work with on there. I think that's a useful piece as well. And now what I need to do is maybe put some into my my daily pop quiz, maybe through a Friday performance question in there. So I'm thinking about it. I have these notes that I've made along those lines. Now, if you are somebody who has been working on your exam, I mentioned earlier those live labs that you could get into and work with. Those are pretty useful. I have some other helpful tips for you. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I have some other helpful tips from you to be able to show you. Before I get to that, we have another call coming in from, oh, there you are. Welcome. What's your name and your question? Oh, I hear a bunch of noise. It doesn't sound like your microphone is going to be working so well with this. It looks like you may have even gotten an account. You're calling in with Skype. Try calling into the nice Skype test call line. And I think that might be able to help. I'm going to put you on hold. We'll see if you're able to call back in. Again, if you are on Skype and you want to call in, you can create an account at blogtalkradio.com and go to blogtalkradio/Professor Messer to be able to call in on that separate line. So I think that's one. Now, I mentioned earlier that there is those sample labs. Sometimes you don't need a full lab. You just want to be able to step through some things. So you may find, just by Googling around, you'll find things like a biosimulator. Now, if you recall, one of the first videos in the 800 series, we also talk about this in the 700 series as well, is there is the need to understand how to work with the BIOS. There's a biosimulator. There's a few of them out there that you can work with. These aren't real BIOS configurations. It's not a real machine, but it gives you the feel. And I think I searched for Phoenix BIOS simulator or emulator, and this is what I came up with. You can go to bit.ly/BIOS sim and be able to have a look at that. So if you wanted to be able to try it yourself and see what type of things you can do with it, that may be worthwhile to look at as well. We have another call that came in, the 424 area code. Hi, what's your name and what's your question?
Hi, I was wondering about the wiring standards for Ethernet cabling. Like, what do we actually need to know?
I worry about and wonder about that myself. Have you ever worked a lot with Ethernet cabling and working in a network environment?
Not so much.
Yep.
I know in theory, but that's about it.
I think it's one of those things we sort of take for granted when we're working on our home computer. You get a patch cable that comes with your cable modem, you plug it in, and you're done. There's not much more you'd even have to worry about. And then, of course, you got the A+ exam. And there's like colors and standards and crossover and all of those other pieces. And it's almost overwhelming. I got into network cabling. It's kind of the last thing I ever did with networking. And when I started working with the network cabling, I really worked hard on trying to understand what to do. And at that time, there was a certification exam on network cabling. You may have heard me use this example before because it's an exam that I failed. And then I took it again and I failed it again. I had to take the exam 3 times before I ever passed my network cabling. So if you wanted to know the bane of my existence, at that point, it was network cabling. Now I've got crimpers and I can create my own cables and create my own pieces that I need. It becomes a little bit easier for me. The CompTIA exam requirements give you a lot of detail about this. Let me see if I can pull up mine, just so we can go through really quick what those exam requirements might be for networking. One of the challenges, though, are you finding that your challenge is more on the fiber side, on the copper side, or is it a combination of those?
It was the twisted pair, the copper, just the 2 different standards. Basically, I'm just wondering if, is it something that I'm really going to know for the test? I mean, it is on my to-do list to learn, though, of course.
Yep, and it's on It's absolutely listed, and they list on the exam those two standards. The ones that you're mentioning are the EITIA T568A, T568B. So already they have a naming convention that is confusing enough as it is. We do this to ourselves in our industry, unfortunately, where we build out and have these odd naming conventions. Fortunately, and you could be asked about this on the exam, are the exact colors that are used. This is one of those things that I think is just rote memorization, unfortunately. If we break it out, EITIA, there's these two ways of effectively wiring an Ethernet cable. There's really no other ways. Well, you could wire them however you'd like. There's two standards that we followed. There are really this 568A and 568B are really talking about the standard. Just within the standard are these wirings, but colloquially, we tend to call it 568A and 568B. And of course, they're wired completely differently. And at the time, there were reasons behind this, but what it really became is just confusing for all of us to be able to know, well, which one are we doing? And I think in most environments, most people are wiring everything up as a 568B configuration, where you have these wires set up with this type inside of the jacket itself. The key being, of course, that you need to make sure you have it the same on both sides to be a straight through cable. So you could absolutely be asked for this. It's one of those rote memorization things, unfortunately, you get into. The problem is that if you've never worked with it, it's confusing. But when you start working with cablings and you start cutting your own cables and you start putting your own crimp connections on the end, this becomes second nature, and it's actually useful to know where this came from and what it is. But I wish I had a shortcut for you, and I really don't. What part of it do you think is really catching you in your brain?
Oh, it was just the complex diagramming and all that.
Yep.
But I'm sure I can just create some mnemonic for me, or maybe somebody else has as well.
Well, fortunately,
some way to memorize them.
There is some practical experience, of course. If you grab a network cable, you should be able to see on that network cable, here's the configuration settings for it. I can look at it just like in this picture that I have here. You can look at the cable that you are using to figure out which is the way this one works. And if it starts with orange, it's 568B. If the first two wires are green, it's 568A. So that's one quick way to make the determination. If they gave you a list, you'd be able to do it. And I hate to even say it this way. This might also be one of those things. I hate telling people not to study something. This might be one of those things that you get a basic idea and you just keep going. If time is an issue,
Fair enough.
There's a lot of networking on the exam. And what you will find is that this is one of those topics that you have to memorize, and it's such a pain, and it's rote memorization. But in the end, if you start working with cabling, you're going to be doing this every day. So it's actually one of those things that it's all around us, and we've never even thought of it before, and yet important to know in our real world efforts, and certainly for both the 700 and the 800 series exam.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call. Let's see who else we might have up on the line, if anyone. We do. We have the 517 area code. Let's see if we can get 517 on the phone. Hi, what's your question? Silent. It's the 517 area code there.
Hello?
There he is. How are you?
I'm doing good.
What's your question?
Well, I've got a question on, printers. I'm taking my test next week for the 801, and the laser printer, the other printers are really confusing me, like the transfer cornea, the conditioning, etc.
I think and whenever I hear people talk about the exams themselves, this is another one of those cases where you have a technology that we just don't get into or think about very much. And printers, I think, is a good example. And printers is one of those things that everybody has in their enterprise. Somebody's printing something out and you run into problems with it all the time. Is there a particular printing technology that's you're just hitting against and having a problem getting it figured out?
Yeah, the laser printing process is really struggling with me.
Makes sense, I would guess, if you think about it, because we don't really have a lot of laser printers in our house. It's not something we even open up and get into a lot. There's a high power inside of it and work with it. In fact, I got a question this week on the laser printer process that said, here's the process that I see, here's the process that you have, and it's different. And the books are a little bit different. My particular one that I'm using has 7 steps. You might see one that has 6 steps and what it does. The steps, though, are for a laser printer almost identical as you go through the laser printer piece. The charging, the exposing, the developing, it's all just a cycle that cycles through. Now, in my video that talks about this for the 800 series, I think I went into a little bit more detail, just a little bit, than the 700 series. So if you're studying for the 800 series, you're probably studying that video. The video is Understanding Laser Printers. It is section 4.1 of the 801 exam. That's the one that goes into that detail. And that same video also talks about now you have to know all these separate components for the laser printer. They didn't ask you this in the 700 series, so you almost have to know more on the 800 series. What does the imaging drum do? What does the fuser assembly do? What does the transfer belt do? But in a way, I like that, because when you finally get down to figuring out the process, for instance, let's drill down on my screen. I'm kind of flipping through my slides here. If you're watching online, you'll get a little bit of delay. But on my slide, for instance, there's
I've got like
about 30 seconds. Yep.
in my screen.
But number 6 here is fusing, the fusing section. Now, in a vacuum, you'd be trying to figure out what is the fusing? What does that do? But I've got a picture of a fuser assembly as earlier on in the video. So you can at least go, oh, well, that was the thing we looked at earlier that creates the heat that binds everything together. So when you get the printer paper out, it's warm, it's hot when you pull it out. That's the thing that did it. So what I tried to do in this video was put together those pieces. So you've got this abstract, very poorly drawn picture of the laser, because I drew it myself, of the laser printing process. And what I tried to do is put more real world stuff before that, so you could at least soak some of those things in. And quite honestly, because I used a lot of different resources to be able to grab this and put it together, I think a lot of that worked for me was my A+ book, and I think Wikipedia actually had a pretty good description of the printing process and what happens where. That may be a very good other resource. Don't just use the videos. I tell everybody the videos are great. You know, they serve a purpose, but make sure you go out and grab some other resources as well to get with that. So hopefully that will help you as you go through and try to figure out what to do with the exam with the laser printers. And it won't be the last time that a laser printer will hate you, I assure you.
Okay.
Thanks for the call. If we go off and look at we've got some other calls in, so I'm going to also, we're going to go back to the one the Raz earlier and see if our microphone's working a little better. Are you there? What's your question? Oh, I hear someone. Are you there?
Sapphire Raz Limited.
Oh, I hear you. There you are. So.
Yes, sorry.
Very nice.
I do have a question. I'm sorry my microphone wasn't working before.
No worries.
As I've been going, I'm doing like the training and stuff, but I'm also like trying to research where I'll go afterwards, and just to see what the realistic opportunities are going to be from once I've got my A+ to getting work, or if I have to go on and do my N+ or something else first before I'll be looking to get a job.
And it's a good question, and it's different depending on where you are. It sounds to me like you may be from the deep south of the United States.
I'm actually from the northeast of England.
Oh, thought it may be somewhere else outside the U.S. Yes, because it's different in the U.K. The process is different. There's been a lot of changes with IT and the training and the apprenticeships that are in the U.K. Are you in the middle of, or are you taking advantage of one of those apprenticeships in the U.K., or is it one where you're just getting the certification independently?
Well, I'm already I'm like 33 and I'm a HGV driver, and I'm wanting to get out of that industry and do something else.
Yep.
So an apprenticeship for me isn't something I can do because I've got like a family to support.
Right.
And over here you're not entitled to any pay when you're doing an apprenticeship.
Right.
which it's something I would do, but there doesn't seem to be anything out there for non-university graduates.
And this is something I had a conversation with somebody in the U.S., because in the U.S., obviously, there is no formal government-sponsored apprenticeship program for IT. It's one where you would get out of school, you would need to learn what you needed to know, and then you go to the next thing. And the certifications themselves are, they serve a purpose. They serve to show somebody that you have a basic understanding of a particular set of topics that you can then bring to the table. But it also has to be tempered. It has to be other things included with that, which is easier when you're going through an apprenticeship because you have at least some experience. Oh, you were sitting at a desk for 6 weeks, for 6 months, and you worked with laser printers and you worked with these other pieces. That's very useful to have that experience. Some people feel that experience may be the most important thing that they run into, that they use, because IT in itself and the things that you do aren't necessarily a business task. You don't need a philosophy degree. You don't need to know about ancient history to be able to work in IT. In some ways, it's a very technical job. It's one where you just need to know how to do a thing and you're able to work there, which is great if you're trying to move from one type of career into another. The problem, of course, is that you have to figure out how all of that works. It's almost like you need a separate technical degree just to be able to do some of these things. In the United States, we have some degrees that are just for trade type skills for IT. So if you need to know how to work in IT, there's a degree just for working in IT. That's something you don't find everywhere around the world either. So there's those two things. You've got experience is useful, having your certification is useful, and a formal degree actually does, at least in people's hiring minds, give you at least a leg up. So, and I realize in your particular situation, you're moving from one type of career to another. That actually might still work for you, because as someone who is now you're now a little bit more mature. I like to think of myself as not older, but more mature. You've been in a career, you've got a family, you've been able to support yourself all these years. It's not like you're right out of school. So there's some real world that's at least behind you. So some hiring managers do take that into account. You might want to look at trying to find a place where you can volunteer or get some practical experience. I think that's really going to be your ace in the hole. It's not that easy, though. You may need to find some friends that are in IT or that work for an organization that needs IT help. A nonprofit is good. A library, someplace that's local that doesn't have a lot of resources that you could learn while you're helping them. And it's maybe something you do in your off hours. It may be something you do for very little, if no pay, but you could put it on a CV and say, yes, I was able to work this particular project at this particular organization, and here are all of the different tasks that I performed for them. And I think on a resume or a CV, people want to see the projects you worked on because it shows the practical application you had towards those. A lot of the resumes and CVs that I see say, I worked as an administrator. Done. And I know nothing more about what they did. I want to know what different topics or different projects you were able to accomplish there. And I recognize in your case, that may be a little bit more of a challenge than most because you have the unique requirements of trying to change in midstream with that. So more than any of those things I mentioned, people you know are actually some of the most important things that can help you here. Because if you have a friend who knows you, they are familiar with your work ethic, they know that you've been working towards doing this, they may have opportunities that they know about, that they have control over, that they could at least bring you in and start moving up there. So I know that's sort of a broad set of different ideas and things to think about, but at least it gives you some ideas of where you should be focusing on. Does that at least help a little bit?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
I thank you for the call and good luck with that. And let us know how it goes, because I've got these folks at GTS Learning that I work with. They're just outside of London. I'm on the phone while I'm over Skype with them all the time. They hear and see about different things. So keep me posted and let me know. Send me an email directly. There's a contact us link right at the top of the Professor Messer website with your contact information. That way, if I hear anything, I can shoot some things back at you as well.
Right, okay, that's brilliant. I'm going to keep on looking, and hopefully I'll find some way of getting some experience. I'll let you know about getting your look.
Keep us posted. Thanks for calling.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Let's go to another call. I've got one in the 812 area code. Let's flip over and see who's on the phone. Hi, what's your name? What's your question?
Yes, my name is Dylan, and I'm going to be taking the 702 exam, the 26, and I was wondering which topics I should really just be hammering in my head to pass that one, because I've already failed it twice, and I'd really like to pass it now.
I can imagine. Have you already taken the 701?
Yes, I passed the 701, no problem, first time.
Okay, so now the pressure is on, right? Now
Yes, it is, yeah.
we really
There's
have.
a few of us taking it, and it's really just driving us crazy.
Okay, let's pass this through, because the 702, people ask me sometimes, which of these is harder, the 701 or the 702? And I think it depends on your personal experience with those. The 701 being the essentials exam gives you the basics of technology. If you've never worked with technology before, this is a pretty good one to go with. The problem is if you've not worked with technology and you get to the 702 exam, I'm going to bring it up on my screen here. You'll see it on the stream in a bit. Hardware is 38%, operating systems 34%, networking and security 15% and 13% respectively. That is the 220-702 practical application exam. These are, if you don't have prior experience in the industry, these are the hardest topics to go through. And I don't have to tell you that at this point. It can kick you around pretty good, because you not only have to know all the hardware pieces, all the operating system details, including back to Windows 2000. Although I don't know that they're asking a lot of Windows 2000 questions any longer, it's still in the objectives, so you still have to memorize those things, and networking and security. Okay, so if you had to cram for this, it really follows the same path that I'd set up for the other things that I talked about earlier. Download the objectives, and in this case, I might even print them out. Get them on a piece of dead tree, because what you can do is go through this list and use each one of these things as checkboxes. Do I know everything I need to know about optical drives, about removable, about external? Do you have a book that you're using along with this? And what book is it?
It is the A+ Guide to Managing and Maintaining Your PC by Gene Andrews.
Okay, that's a great book, and that's one at least that doesn't go too far outside the scope of what you need to know. It really focuses on a scope. Do you just have that book, or are there other books that you're using?
Mainly just that book and your videos.
If you've already been through the exam and you're finding it difficult the first 2 times through, like I mentioned, I've already been in your seat before trying to take an exam for the 3rd time. This may be the point where you want to grab a different book. And it's remarkable how the differences are. When I first sat down and took my A+ exam, I took the exam, I read through one book completely, and I started with the Mike Myers all-in-one book was the first one I read. It's huge. It's a book. It's this thick. It's enormous. It tells you everything you would ever want to know about the way that electrons flow through the bus of a computer. And as we've now realized that I've taken the exam, I really didn't need to know how the electrons flow through the bus of the computer. That's a lot to have to worry about. So what I read through that whole thing and thought, wow, I've really got to study a lot for this. Then I grabbed the Dummies book, the Dummies Guide to the A+ certification. And I'm reading through this, and it was so much different. It was actually much easier for me to read, because it gave me just the information I needed to pass the exam. It didn't give me everything I needed to know about technology. It just gave me what I needed. Now, to be fair, Mike Myers also has one that's a passport book, it's called, that has just what you need to know for the exam. I would recommend that you go to a library or go to your favorite bookstore or find a friend who's also studying. If they have one of those books, maybe it's time to swap books out, because you'll find that you'll get different things out of a book, and maybe it's just the writing style. So that helped me when I was going through the A+ exam. I also think a good Q&A process really helps me as well. Do you have a sample exams or a good Q&A book that you're using?
Yes, I've used that Freestyle before, and I can't remember the name of the other thing, but I have been using that as well.
Okay, the Freestyle is good, but it's a limited number of sample questions that you can work with. So there's only a finite number that are there. one guide that I really like besides the GTS Learning Freestyle, I like the Exam Cram Practice Questions series. Their Exam Cram has a book that is the book that teaches you the topics, but they have one that's just practice questions. And the one that's practice questions I like because they give you the question, and then there's a section of the book you can go to that tells you it was A, B, C, or D. Then there's another section of the book that says, here's why A was wrong, here's why B was right, here's why C was wrong, here's why D was wrong. They go into a lot of detail about that specific question. And for me, I like to get that feedback. I like to know why it was right, but I also like to know why the others were wrong. And when you start going down that road, it starts reinforcing for you what those other technologies were in the question. So when you get a question, it was wrong on this one, but here's another question that asks about it, you now know what the technology is. If you don't have a resource like that, that really explains to you what was right and what was wrong about the sample question, then you're missing an opportunity. And unfortunately, a lot of the questions at the end of some books, other books go into detail, but some books just give you A, B, C, or D. And a lot of the online resources really just give you A, B, C, or D. So go through and grab, even buy the Exam Cram book. Let me pull it up. I don't get any money from this. So you can, let's go to Amazon. Let me pull it up on my screen. And let's find the exam. Can't type. Practice questions. There. I can type fine when you people aren't watching me. The book itself, $18 to buy new. There is a Kindle version for $13. So for $13, $13.19, not a bad investment. I really like that book. And that might help you get into the mode of sitting for the exam, going through the questions, understanding what they are. I think that one helped me probably more than anything when I started working with it. And I don't have it on behind me on the up there, but I used to have it on my shelves back there because it was a constant reference for me when I was taking my 700 series. The 800 series practice questions, just as good. Interestingly enough, I don't know if this even matters, but it's worth mentioning, is that the Exam Cram book is from the same company that is Pearson VUE that you're ultimately taking your questions from, or your test from. So that may be useful to have that there. So if that's my recommendation, grab a different book, use those exam objectives as your checklist, get a good Q&A, and best of luck.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thanks for calling. We have one more call on the line. Not sure if I had this one up before or not. We're going to go back to 514. You've been on hold for a while. Hi, what's your name? What's your question?
Hello?
Hi, what's your name and your question? Oh, you're a busy guy today.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Sajid. I'm calling from Brampton, Canada.
Nice to hear from you. What's your question?
Yeah, the question is, this is regarding PCI Express backward compatibility. But this is something like, if I want to put 16X card into 1X slot, some motherboards, they have given the small slot to put it back, but some motherboard doesn't have it. So how do I take that in the exam perspective? Whether I have to consider it as backward compatibility or not?
Well, fortunately for the A+ exam anyway, we don't even get that deep into the topics of compatibilities between adapter cards that are going into the different adapters or not. But PCI Express is one where certain adapter cards can use either, let's say you've got an X16 adapter card, you can plug it into the X16 slot. You could take it, if the card supports this, you could plug it into a smaller slot and use it that way. If the card supports that. Not all cards support that functionality or even able to fit into the slot to be able to use it that way, but they'll slow down to be able to do that. You just have to check with the manufacturer of the card to be able to see, is it going to work properly, and on the motherboard and the different options that I have. But fortunately for the A+ exam, you only have to know, what is the PCI Express? What are the different types of interfaces you're going to plug into? What are the different speeds of those through the different PCI Express versions? and really you don't get into the intricacies of troubleshooting the different size slots into the different size with the different adapters that you're using. So hopefully that can give you at least a limit on what you're going to have to learn to be able to get through that. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's the bus types. I think I talked about the bus types last month. If you want to go through last month's study group, we talked about PCI. I think I talked a little bit about PCI Express. In fact, we were in the chat room on the website this month, and we were talking about the layout of a motherboard and what connects to where. And we were noticing that a lot of controllers connect to the PCI Express bus to finally get, or even the PCI bus to finally get out to the North Bridge. So we were looking at, for instance, the USB controllers that if you put in a block diagram, the USB controllers connect to South Bridge. But in reality, the USB controllers are connecting to a PCI bus, which is then connecting to South Bridge, or in some cases, even directly to the North Bridge. It was interesting to see how many of those in a block diagram are really functionally, physically connecting very differently, because block diagrams are there just for us to understand the basic structure. Every motherboard's different in the way that it operates. Let's go to the 202 area code. Hi, what's your name and what's your question? Oh, are you still there? I hear your noises.
Yeah, hello?
Hey, how are you?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hey, how you doing, Professor Messi?
Hey, good to hear from you.
My name's David. I have a brief question. Going back to the question you had about the exam cram. Currently, I'm in exam cram 801.
Yes.
And I'm just finishing up my Network Plus class, and I'm jumping into Security Plus, but I still have to take the 801 and 802.
You got a lot going on.
I'm in a bundle course.
Okay.
I have to, I'm thinking about taking it next week, but my main question, going back to exam cram practice questions, I wanted to know if you would recommend, well, it's kind of like a 2-in-1 question. I'm using the Pearson 801, 802 book, exam cram, so I think I'm kind of on the right path. I want to know if they have the same questions that's on the guide that you mentioned earlier. And 2, with that information, what would you recommend as a great brain dump when you go into the booth, like to put on paper? They give you scratch sheets of paper to write information down as much as you can. So I was recommended by my instructor to use, the 802, the 11, ABGNs, and stuff like that, whatever I can remember at the time before my exam actually starts.
Well, you bring up a good point. Let's first talk about the exam cram book that you have. Do you have the exam cram guide that has all of the topics, the study topics inside of it, or do you have specifically the exam cram practice questions?
No, I have the guide, the actual, the 220, 801, 802 with the exam cram answers with explanations in the back with the CD and everything.
Gotcha. I don't know if there's 2 books. There's the exam cram study guide, and then there's the sample question book. And I haven't actually compared the 2 to see if it's the same questions in both of those. Maybe somebody in the chat room can give us some insight into that while we're on the phone. The other question that you had was a good one. I don't know why I don't mention this more often, because it's a great study tip. When you first walk into the exam, if you've never gone to the exam before, you first step in to the room. There may be somebody else in there. There's usually a bunch of computers there. There's a keyboard, there's a mouse. You sit down, and they give you either a whiteboard with a erasable ink on it, or they will give you pieces of paper and a pencil. Before you start your exam, before the clock starts ticking, you can write whatever you'd like there. You got plenty of time. The clock doesn't start until you start the exam. So before anything is happening, you can sit there and write things out on your screen, on your piece of paper, or on the whiteboard. And if you're doing this, it's those things that are the rote memorization that is most useful for you to just get out of your head and onto a sheet of paper. And I think this is so important from a couple of different scenarios. The first one is, if I can first start writing down, let's say I'm walking into my 802, or you mentioned that you're going to the 801 or 802 exam.
801.
Okay, you're going the 801 exam. The 801 has on it, let's pull up the exam objectives. Let's just do a practical example of if I was to write down stuff on my 801 exam, what would I write down? So we know that there's a section of the 801 exam. This drove people crazy when I first started creating the videos for it, because there's a whole section, we talked earlier about CPU sockets. So there's a whole section of things that would be useful to write down and at least get a summary of. But there's a whole section on the speeds and feeds. They go through compare and contrast various connection interfaces, explain their purposes, and in the explanation, they put, I have to know USB 112030 speed and different characteristics and connection types. Firewire 400 800 speed and distance. SATA 1, SATA 2, SATA 3, eSATA IDE speeds. I mean, they're specifically telling you in the exam objectives, you need to know not only the technologies, you need to know the speeds. And in another section, you have to know distances as well. That's rote memorization. Some of these you probably work with, USB goes about this far. Others like FireWire, we don't really run into much unless it's a very specific environment. And those have a different, completely different set of speeds and feeds. That's another one I would write down. Let's jump ahead though. In the exam objectives, the 70 or the 801 has networking on it. This is probably the other place where I would start writing things down because there's so many different network types and distances. So if you've memorized the copper, you've memorized fiber, you've memorized all of the different fiber interfaces, and it's something that you just can't immediately snap into your brain what they are, that's another great thing to write down. But I think your instructor's right. This is a great opportunity to get everything out all at once. The other reason you might want to write these things down is you may be someone who tests like I do. I'm a very nervous test taker. The whole process of walking in the door to the exam place is I start to get nervous. Okay, here's my ID, my hand's shaking. Here's my ID. Here's my signature verification. Let's go in the room. I sit down. I will start the exam and go through the first 5 questions, and I'll stop and think, what did I just read? What were the first 5? I don't even know what I just went through. So it takes me about 10 minutes just to settle down in the room for the nerves and the adrenaline to kind of feed itself off. And then I'm normal. Then I can think again and get back into it. So I think sitting down and having a task and writing down on a sheet of paper or writing down on the whiteboard, there's a visceral writing down calming effect that takes place. That is a great place to start getting all of that out. Plus you're dumping your knowledge out of your brain and sticking it on a piece of paper. You can set that aside and now concentrate on some of those other questions on the exam. So do the same thing on your 802. The 802 has security. For security, there's a lot of things you have to know about hashes. When you get to Security Plus, you're going to be writing a lot down. Security Plus is just tons of things you have to know about hashes, about encryption types, about algorithms. It's a lot of memorization on Security Plus. So it's good that you're taking A+ now. You're kind of going to get a good feel for what you need to know. And then when you finally get to Security Plus, you'll have the process down cold. It's going to be really easy for you.
Okay.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you so much.
Let us know how it goes, and good luck with those exams.
Thank you. I will.
Well, we've come to the end. We've gone really 38 minutes over what we would normally go to the end of our study group, but we had so many great questions this week. I felt bad that to leave anybody on the phone. So it was good we took an opportunity to do that. If you'd like to follow what we're doing all week long, you can find us on Twitter, professormesser.com/Twitter. You want to really do me a favor? People say all the time, hey, is there anything I can contribute? I don't take any type of monetary contributions, but if you wanted to follow me on Twitter and especially subscribe to my YouTube channel, it's remarkable how much that actually helps. So if you want to help me, that's a great way to do it. Again, GTS Learning has those great labs. If you're in the middle of trying to do that, you can find out more and take the free hour-long sample at professormesser.com/freestyle labs. I also have a 10% voucher discount on the Professor Messer website, thanks to GTS Learning. If you go to professormesser.com/vouchers, you can take any CompTIA exam, and that is 10% off. just straight off the top. So if you're not in a position where you have other discounts you could take advantage of, this is a great one to use, professormesser.com/vouchers. I think it expires at the end of August, but I hope to have another one available when we get past the August timeframe. I do these every month. If you want to join us for our A+ study group, my Network Plus study group is on the 31st of this month. I'm sneaking it in at the end of the month. You can also follow and figure out when the next one of these will be if you go to professormesser.com/calendar. Boy, what a great study group it was. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your calls. Thank you for the chat room. Thanks for all of those things. I appreciate everything that you put into this. We wouldn't be able to do it without you. We'll see you next month on the Professor Messer A+ study group.